A black man helps his neighbors, then HOA accuses him of abducting the child. Shocking truth emerges. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow across the quiet suburban street. Each house, neatly lined with manicured lawns and flowering shrubs, seemed to bask in the warmth of the afternoon. Sprinklers sprayed arcs of water that glimmered like tiny rainbows in the sunlight, their rhythmic hum mingling with the distant laughter of children riding bicycles along the sidewalks. The air carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers, a scent that always seemed to make the neighborhood feel alive and welcoming. Jordan, a black man in his late 30s, stepped lightly onto his front porch, a calm presence amid the peaceful chaos of the afternoon. He was well respected in the community, known not for grand gestures, but for his steady kindness, helping elderly neighbors carry groceries, tending the gardens of those who could no longer bend and kneel, and always greeting passersby with a genuine, warm smile. His medium athletic build and upright posture gave him an air of quiet confidence, while his expressive dark brown eyes reflected both attentiveness and empathy. Today, he wore a solid-colored polo shirt tucked neatly into fitted khaki pants, his sneakers softly scuffing the wooden porch steps as he adjusted his stance. As he watched, a group of children sped past, ringing the air with laughter and shouts of excitement. Their joy was infectious, and Jordan's lips curled into a subtle smile, the kind that warmed the heart without demanding attention. From a distance, Mrs. Henderson waved from her porch, clutching a basket of laundry, and Jordan waved back, nodding politely as their eyes met for a brief, familiar exchange. Across the street, a father lifted his toddler onto a tricycle, careful hands guiding the little one as he wobbled down the driveway. Every movement, every sound, seemed to weave together into a tapestry of ordinary, reassuring life. Jordan's gaze drifted toward the mailbox at the edge of his lawn, checking to see if any letters had arrived, though none had today. Small details like this brought him a sense of calm, a rhythm to the day that anchored him. He adjusted the brim of his cap and exhaled softly, feeling the subtle warmth of the sun on his skin. Even the soft creak of the porch swing behind him, as it swayed gently in the breeze, felt like a whisper of normalcy, an affirmation that life, in its simple beauty, continued as it always had. For Jordan, this afternoon was more than a pause in the day. It was a reflection of the life he had cultivated in this neighborhood. Each wave, each nod, each moment of quiet observation was a thread connecting him to those around him. He was a part of the rhythm of this place, a steady presence in the ebb and flow of suburban life. And as he stood there, taking in the sunlight, the laughter, and the gentle hum of the sprinklers, he felt a deep, unspoken contentment, a sense of belonging, of purpose, and of peace that could only come from being both known and needed by the community he called home. The warmth of the afternoon sun did little to ease the sudden tension that had begun to creep across the street. Jordan, who had just moments before been enjoying the familiar rhythm of neighborhood life, noticed subtle changes as he stepped onto his porch. The usual friendly nods and waves from neighbors now felt strained, their smiles tight, almost forced. Whispers, low and cautious, floated from porch to porch, carried by the gentle breeze, but impossible to ignore. The comforting laughter of children on bicycles seemed distant somehow, muted by the weight of eyes that lingered a fraction too long on him. Across the street, the self-appointed HOA enforcers appeared in the driveway of a neighbor's house, their uniforms stiff and their posture rigid. Jordan watched as they moved deliberately, scrutinizing houses with a meticulous, almost invasive precision. When their gaze lingered on his property, he felt a chill despite the heat of the afternoon. These were no ordinary neighborhood watchers. Their eyes carried authority without accountability, a self-imposed power that left Jordan uneasy. Their steps echoed softly against the pavement, punctuated by whispered comments and the occasional nod toward him. Every glance felt heavy, loaded with silent judgment. As the enforcers approached his street, Jordan's chest tightened. He reminded himself to breathe, to remain calm, but his instincts whispered that something was wrong. He could feel the shift in the neighborhood's atmosphere, subtle yet unmistakable. Friends who had once greeted him warmly now barely met his eyes, offering curt nods before retreating behind fences and porch railings. The warmth that had made this street feel like home seemed to evaporate, replaced by an invisible tension that wrapped around him like a heavy cloak. Then, the notice appeared. At first, he thought it might be a misdelivered flyer or some minor HOA announcement. But as his eyes scanned the paper taped neatly to his front door, Jordan felt his stomach drop. The words jumped off the page with a weight that seemed impossible to carry. Under suspicion of abducting a child from the local park. His name was printed clearly, his house unmistakably marked, the accusations stark and unyielding. The paper fluttered slightly in the breeze, as though mocking him, daring him to respond. Jordan's hands shook slightly as he reached to touch the notice, the texture of the paper scratching against his fingertips. His mind raced, cycling through disbelief, confusion, and a rising edge of fear. How could this happen here, in the neighborhood where he had lived openly and helped others for years? He glanced at the enforcers now standing across the street, their expressions unreadable, and felt a surge of anger and helplessness. The quiet whispers of neighbors seemed to multiply, filling the space around him with suspicion, judgment, and unspoken accusations. For the first time that afternoon, Jordan felt the isolation of standing alone, a single figure under scrutiny, while the familiar rhythms of life continued around him. The sun continued to shine, sprinklers continued to spray, and children continued to laugh, yet the world had subtly shifted. What had once been ordinary and safe now felt charged, tense, and fragile. He tore his gaze from the notice and breathed deeply, steeling himself. Somehow he knew that this was only the beginning, that the shadow of suspicion would stretch long over his life, and that every word, every gesture, and every interaction from this moment forward would carry the weight of a false accusation he had to confront. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a bright, unrelenting light over the suburban street. Children's laughter echoed from the nearby park, bicycles clattered along the pavement, and sprinklers hissed across freshly cut lawns. Yet for Jordan, the warmth of the afternoon could not penetrate the tightening knot of anxiety in his chest. Across the street, a small crowd had begun to gather, neighbors drawn by curiosity, whispers, and the unmistakable tension that had already begun circulating through the neighborhood. From the corner of his eye, Jordan saw the HOA enforcers approaching, their steps measured but heavy with an air of authority that seemed to demand immediate obedience. They were not police officers, nor did they hold any official badge, yet the confidence in their posture, the sharpness of their voices, and the meticulous way they carried themselves conveyed a sense of power Jordan had never invited into his life. One of them, a tall man with a tight jaw and watchful eyes, waved a sheet of paper toward him. "This concerns you," the enforcer barked, his voice cutting across the ambient sounds of the neighborhood. Jordan's stomach sank as he realized the crowd of onlookers had stopped mid-step, attention fixed squarely on him. The paper, now trembling slightly in Jordan's hands, claimed that he was under suspicion of abducting a child. From the local park, a notion so absurd that Jordan felt his chest tighten, disbelief and indignation intertwining into annoying panic. He opened his mouth, ready to insist on his innocence, but the words faltered under the weight of the crowd's silent scrutiny. Murmurs rippled through the neighbors, some whispering questions, others leaning closer to catch the accusations, eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The enforcers leaned in, their voices low but insistent, peppered with leading questions and insinuations. Each word felt like a carefully aimed dart, meant not to uncover truth but to wound, to erode Jordan's composure in front of everyone who had once greeted him with smiles and friendly waves. Jordan's mind raced. He recalled all the afternoons he had spent helping elderly neighbors carry groceries, planting flowers for the community, and offering friendly greetings to passers-by. None of that mattered here. In the eyes of the enforcers and under the watchful gaze of the neighbors, he was already guilty. The injustice pressed down on him like a physical weight. He tried to explain calmly, his voice steady despite the tremor he felt inside. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said, meeting their eyes. But the enforcers dismissed him with a scoff and an eye roll, their authority unchecked by reason or fact. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity as the humiliation continued. Neighbors exchanged glances, some averting their eyes, others leaning in with morbid curiosity. Jordan's chest tightened with every question, every accusation, until he felt utterly trapped. Each attempt to clarify, to present logic or appeal to decency, was met with indifference, sometimes even ridicule. Finally, the enforcers concluded their performance, waving the paper like a flag of their own perceived power, and retreated down the street, leaving Jordan standing alone on his porch. His hands trembled slightly, the echoes of the crowd's stares still burning in his skin. He had been publicly humiliated, accused of a crime he did not commit, and the shadow of injustice lingered heavily around him. Yet beneath the frustration and shame, a quiet determination began to stir. He would uncover the truth, piece by piece, and reclaim both his dignity and the respect of his community. The morning after the humiliating confrontation, Jordan's neighborhood seemed quieter than usual, yet beneath that quiet, an unsettling tension lingered. He stepped onto his porch, adjusting the collar of his solid-colored polo shirt, and immediately sensed that something was amiss. The street looked ordinary, children riding bicycles, sprinklers clicking across freshly cut lawns, yet a series of small, disjointed occurrences gnawed at the edges of his mind. A small child, perhaps 7 or 8, appeared near the edge of his yard. Jordan noticed him lingering, glancing around nervously before shyly approaching. "Mister, did you see what happened yesterday?" the child asked, eyes wide and anxious. Jordan frowned, bending slightly to meet the boy at eye level. The words were vague, fragmented, and yet the tension behind them was unmistakable. The child shuffled his feet, wringing his hands, then retreated a few steps as if afraid of being caught speaking too freely. Jordan felt a mixture of curiosity and concern. There was something in the boy's urgency that suggested knowledge beyond what a child should normally notice. As he turned back toward his porch, Jordan's eyes caught an unusual sight. A backpack had been left at the edge of the steps, its fabric worn, colors faded, and tags hanging loosely. It wasn't his. He hadn't seen it delivered, nor did he recognize it as belonging to any of the neighborhood children. Crouching to inspect it, he noticed the contents were jumbled: a notebook with scribbled notes, a small water bottle, and an oddly folded jacket. Nothing incriminating, certainly, but the presence of the backpack felt deliberate, as though someone had placed it there to draw attention, or perhaps as a silent message. A cold shiver ran down his spine, the small incidents forming an invisible pattern that he could not yet decipher. Later, as he watered the small patch of flowers by his porch, a neighbor appeared from behind a fence. Mrs. Ellison, a woman in her 70s with a gentle demeanor, seemed hesitant, her hands clutching the edge of her cardigan. "Jordan, I think I saw something the other day," she murmured, her voice barely audible. I can't be sure, but maybe it could help." Jordan straightened, his heart beating faster. "Anything at all," he said, leaning forward earnestly. Mrs. Ellison shook her head quickly. "I shouldn't. I can't. Just be careful, that's all." And just like that, she retreated, leaving Jordan with more questions than answers. The day passed slowly, each moment punctuated by small, perplexing signs. A car parked unusually long at the end of the street, a neighbor's window slightly ajar though the house appeared empty, the faint sound of hurried footsteps fading just beyond view. Each clue alone seemed inconsequential, but together they built a tapestry of unease, a puzzle that Jordan knew he had to solve before the shadows of suspicion returned to engulf him completely. By evening, as the sun dipped lower, casting long orange streaks across the street, Jordan stood on his porch, surveying the neighborhood with a cautious eye. The strange occurrences, the child's questions, the mysterious backpack, the half-spoken warning were disjointed pieces of a puzzle that refused to reveal its picture. Yet in the pit of his stomach, Jordan felt certain of one thing. These signs were deliberate, and understanding them might be the key to uncovering the truth behind the accusations that threatened not just his reputation, but the very sense of safety and peace he had built in this neighborhood. The next afternoon, the suburban street seemed calm once more, though the tension that had settled over Jordan's life still lingered like a shadow just beyond the edges of sunlight. He was tending to his small garden, carefully pruning the edges of the flower beds, when movement at the end of the driveway caught his eye. A teenage boy, maybe 14 or 15, hesitated by the sidewalk, glancing nervously at the street before taking a few tentative steps toward him. Jordan straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth, and offered a cautious smile. "Hey there," he said softly. "Can I help you with something?" The boy swallowed hard, his hands fidgeting at his sides. I think I need to tell you something," he stammered. His dark eyes darted toward the houses, as though expecting someone to emerge and stop him. Jordan nodded, stepping slightly closer but giving the boy space. "It's okay," he said. "You can tell me anything." For a moment, the teen seemed frozen, his words caught somewhere between fear and urgency. Then, in a rush, he spoke. I saw what really happened at the park," he said, voice low and trembling. Jordan's pulse quickened, and he leaned in, attentive. "There was a woman," the boy continued, "an adult. She was with the child, and it looked strange, but she wasn't doing anything bad. I think people just misunderstood." Jordan blinked, letting the information settle. The accusations that had hung over him, the whispers, the suspicious glances, the humiliating notice taped to his door, suddenly seemed lighter, almost surreal. His hands, still dirt-streaked from the garden, trembled slightly as relief surged through him. "A woman?" he repeated, his voice calm but tinged with astonishment. "Are you sure?" The boy nodded quickly, eyes wide. "I'm sure. I didn't know how to say anything before. I didn't want to get involved, but you're not guilty. It wasn't you. It was her." Jordan took a deep breath, exhaling slowly, feeling a knot in his chest unwind just a little. For the first time in days, he allowed himself a tentative smile. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "You've done the right thing by telling me." Yet even as relief washed over him, Jordan could not escape the lingering shadow of public scrutiny. The small crowd of neighbors who had gathered days ago, their eyes full of suspicion, had not yet heard the truth. The whispers might continue, the doubts might linger. But the core of the matter, the truth of what had occurred, was now clear, and for Jordan, that was the first step toward reclaiming his dignity. He watched the teen walk away, a mixture of courage and nervousness in his stride. Jordan returned to the porch, leaning against the railing as he surveyed his neighborhood. The sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the houses and lawns in warm hues, but the glow seemed tempered by the weight of what had transpired. In that quiet moment, Jordan understood something profound. Innocence, though easily questioned, could not be erased. And sometimes, it takes the bravery of one small voice, one child, one teenager to illuminate the truth for the world to see. The road to full vindication would be long, but with the witness's courage, the first cracks in the wall of false accusation had appeared. And Jordan, standing in the soft glow of late afternoon light, felt the faint stirrings of hope return, fragile but undeniable. The following morning, Jordan moved with a sense of purpose that had eluded him during the past days of tension. The humiliation, the whispers, the cold stares, all of it had fueled a quiet determination within him. If he was to reclaim his reputation and restore the calm of his neighborhood, he knew he could not rely on hope alone. He would need allies, evidence, and the courage to confront the false narrative head-on. He began by visiting Mr. Thompson, an elderly neighbor whose home was equipped with a network of security cameras covering the street and the small park nearby. Mr. Thompson greeted him warmly, though his expression betrayed the unease that had settled across the neighborhood. "I've got all the footage from the last week," the man said, his voice low, "and if anyone can prove what really happened, it's in here." Jordan nodded, gratitude flickering in his chest, and together they reviewed hours of recordings. The video was initially inconclusive, blurred by distance and shadows, but then patterns emerged. There was the child wandering away from the playground, momentarily lost and uncertain. A woman appeared, calmly guiding the child back toward the safe area, speaking soothingly, her movements careful and deliberate. At no point did Jordan appear in any footage near the child. The evidence was subtle, yet it cut through the cloud of suspicion like sunlight through fog. Encouraged, Jordan enlisted the help of Miss Caldwell, a retired community lawyer who had been a guiding presence in the neighborhood for decades. Her experience in untangling disputes and confronting bureaucratic overreach proved invaluable. She reviewed the footage, the witness statements, and even the reports filed by the self-appointed HOA enforcers. "This is clear," she said firmly, adjusting her glasses. "He had nothing to do with this. Their actions were rash, biased, and entirely unsubstantiated." Jordan felt a flicker of vindication but knew the challenge was not yet over. The court of public opinion remained skeptical. Next, they reached out to a local journalist known for investigative work in community affairs. The reporter, intrigued by the story, agreed to document the sequence of events, capturing interviews with neighbors, Mr. Thompson, and the nervous teenage witness from the park. Through careful narration and visual proof, the journalist laid out the truth in compelling detail. The child had wandered off innocently, was safely guided by another adult, and Jordan had been wrongly accused, humiliated, and publicly shamed. The narrative shifted as evidence accumulated. The HOA enforcers' behavior, aggressive questioning, public intimidation, and the hastily taped notice accusing Jordan of a crime was exposed as reckless and deeply biased. Footage showed them patrolling the street with exaggerated scrutiny, whispering amongst themselves while ignoring clear signs that contradicted their assumptions. Neighborhood residents who had once avoided Jordan now watched the truth unfold, their expressions a mixture of disbelief, guilt, and relief. For Jordan, the revelations brought not only vindication, but a profound sense of justice. The truth, painstakingly gathered and carefully presented, had pierced the veil of suspicion and humiliation. Though the echoes of doubt had lingered for days, the combined power of evidence, witness courage, and principled advocacy had restored clarity and fairness. Standing on his porch, Jordan finally allowed himself to exhale deeply, feeling the weight of accusation lift from his shoulders. In that moment, the neighborhood seemed to breathe with him, the warmth of afternoon sun returning to its rightful calm, now underscored by a hard-earned sense of justice. Even as the truth about the child's safety became clearer, Jordan could not shake the uneasy feeling that something deeper had driven the relentless accusations. The evidence, gathered carefully through cameras, witness statements, and interviews, pointed not only to his innocence, but to a deliberate effort behind the public humiliation he had endured. The shadows of suspicion had not been cast by mere coincidence. They had been carefully engineered by someone within the very ranks of the self-appointed HOA enforcers. It was Mrs. Caldwell, the retired community lawyer, who first voiced the unspoken suspicion. "Look closely at the patterns," she said, pointing to notes she had taken over the past week. "This wasn't just sloppy oversight or a misunderstanding. One of them, he's had interactions with you before, hasn't he? Arguments over minor community decisions, disagreements about meetings." Jordan's memory stirred. The enforcer in question, a man named Leonard, had frequently confronted him about garden placements, parking spots, and even casual interactions with neighbors. Each encounter had carried an undertone of irritation, a subtle assertion of power over someone who refused to bow to it. the revelation settled like a weight in Jordan's chest. Leonard's motivations were no longer hidden behind procedural pretense. They were personal. The accusations, the public humiliation, the notices posted on doors, all were carefully orchestrated to intimidate Jordan, to sow doubt among neighbors, and to tarnish the reputation of a man who had long been a positive, stabilizing presence in the community. It was a calculated campaign, designed not merely to frighten, but to silence. Jordan felt a mixture of anger and vindication. The fear he had endured, the whispers that had followed him down the street, the eyes that had once scrutinized him with suspicion, it had all been intentional. Yet, for the first time, he understood the scope of the deception, and the anger that simmered in Leonard's behavior now seemed both petty and dangerous. When the neighborhood association convened to review the events, the evidence against Leonard was undeniable. Security footage, witness testimony, and Jordan's own meticulous records formed a mosaic of clarity that exposed the enforcer's abuse of authority. Leonard's attempts to manipulate perception and intimidate a respected community member could no longer hide behind claims of diligence or civic duty. The board reprimanded him formally, stripping him of his position and restricting his involvement in any further community oversight. The consequences were severe, and the message was clear. Personal vendettas and intimidation tactics had no place in a neighborhood built on trust and respect. As Jordan stood on his porch later that afternoon, the sun slanting warmly across his lawn, he allowed himself a quiet exhale. The truth had surfaced not only to restore his reputation, but to reveal the insidious motives that had fueled the ordeal. The shadow of suspicion had lifted, replaced by a sense of justice and clarity that seemed almost tangible in the air. For the first time since the accusations began, the neighborhood felt genuinely calm. Jordan understood that while courage and evidence had revealed the truth, the hidden motives behind injustice often lurked quietly, waiting for moments of vulnerability. And yet, even in the face of personal resentment and deliberate attacks, integrity, patience, and courage could illuminate the darkness and hold those who wield power accountable. The late afternoon sun bathed the street in a warm, forgiving glow, painting the houses and lawns in hues of gold and amber. Jordan stepped onto his porch, the tension that had shadowed him for days finally lifting, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph and relief. His name had been cleared, the accusations proven false, and the evidence irrefutable. After the weeks of whispers, suspicion, and public humiliation, dignity and truth had prevailed. He paused for a moment, letting the gentle breeze carry the faint scent of freshly cut grass. Children laughed in the distance, their carefree joy a subtle reminder that life, despite its twists and turbulence, continued onward. Jordan's eyes scanned the street, noting familiar faces beginning to emerge from behind fences and porches. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact, who had turned away with curt nods, were now approaching slowly, their steps hesitant yet deliberate. Mrs. Henderson, who had once clutched her laundry basket with anxious glances toward him, offered a tentative smile. "Jordan, I'm so sorry," she said softly, her voice tinged with guilt. "We should never have doubted you." Jordan inclined his head, the warmth of forgiveness welling quietly within him. "Thank you," he replied, keeping his tone calm and steady. "I understand. What matters is the truth now." One by one, more neighbors approached. Some murmured apologies. Others simply nodded, eyes lowered in acknowledgement of their hasty assumptions. Each interaction reminded Jordan of the fragile balance between trust and suspicion, and how quickly it could be tipped by fear, rumor, or bias. The quiet strength he had maintained through public scrutiny now became a mirror, reflecting to the community the importance of fairness, patience, and critical thought. As he moved along his porch, greeting those who had come forward, Jordan noticed subtle shifts in demeanor, relief, regret, and a new awareness that the judgments cast without evidence could have far-reaching consequences. The conversation among neighbors began to change. Instead of idle whispers, They spoke of reflection, of questioning assumptions before accepting appearances, and of the dangers inherent in acting on partial truths. In that moment, the community itself seemed to inhale, collectively learning the weight of its actions. Jordan felt a deep sense of inner calm as he returned to his own yard, kneeling briefly to tend the small flower beds he had nurtured during calmer days. Every petal, every blade of grass, seemed to symbolize the resilience of patience and integrity. Despite the trials, the community's heartbeat had returned to rhythm, stronger and more thoughtful for having witnessed the consequences of rushed judgment stopped by sunset. The street glowed in soft gold, children's laughter ringing out once more, a sound untainted by suspicion. Jordan stood on his porch, taking in the scene, and allowed himself to smile freely. He understood now, more profoundly than ever, that home was not merely the walls or the lawn, but the trust, dignity, and identity that one carried within it. And in defending truth with courage, he had not only restored his own honor, but reminded everyone around him of the fragile yet precious value of justice. The day ended not with fanfare or celebration, but with a quiet, steadfast resolution that in this neighborhood, as in life, truth eventually rises, integrity endures, and even the smallest voice, when brave, can illuminate what is right. As the last rays of the afternoon sun stretched across the suburban street, casting long, gentle shadows over lawns and sidewalks, Jordan stood quietly on his porch, reflecting on the ordeal that had unfolded. The hum of sprinklers, the distant laughter of children, and the occasional bark of a dog all blended into a symphony of normalcy that now felt both precious and fragile. The neighborhood, once a stage for whispers, suspicion, and unfounded accusations, had returned to calm, but the lessons lingered far deeper than the surface. Jordan thought first of authority, the invisible, power wielded by the self-appointed HOA enforcers, a power that had been misused with personal malice. What had seemed like civility and oversight had revealed itself as something far more insidious, a mechanism through which fear could be imposed and reputations tarnished. Injustice, Jordan realized, rarely arrived in the form of overt cruelty. It often hid behind rules, uniforms, and carefully chosen words, waiting for a moment of vulnerability to strike. He remembered the teenage witness at the park, the small voice trembling but determined, speaking truth in the face of uncertainty. The courage of that one individual had been a spark, igniting the chain of events that eventually revealed the reality behind the accusations. It was a vivid reminder that truth often requires bravery to emerge, and that even the faintest voice, when honest, can ripple outward to illuminate wrongdoing. Jordan also reflected on patience. Lies, he had learned, could spread like wildfire, fueled by assumption, fear, and a lack of scrutiny. Yet truth, though slower and quieter, had a steadfast quality that endured through observation, evidence, and perseverance. The hours of reviewing security footage, gathering witness statements, and confronting the narrative with methodical care had not been easy. They demanded time, resilience, and faith in the integrity of human reason. But ultimately, they prevailed. The false narrative, once threatening to swallow him whole, had unraveled under the light of careful scrutiny. Beyond truth and courage, Jordan thought of home and community. A house was never just a structure, a lawn, or a mailbox. It was dignity, memory, and identity. The subtle warmth of a neighbor's nod, the smile of a child riding past, the trust built through years of small, everyday kindnesses. These were the foundations that gave a neighborhood its humanity. To attack someone's reputation in such a place was to strike at the very essence of what made it safe, comforting, and alive. Reclaiming that sense of home had required more than proof. It had required the reaffirmation of shared values, respect, and trust. And finally, Jordan understood the enduring power of courage from the child who witnessed, the teen who spoke, and the wrongly accused man who refused to bow to fear. Courage, he realized, could shield the innocent and expose wrongdoing, even against authority misused and appearances carefully maintained. It was a quiet, unassuming strength, but one that could reshape perceptions, restore justice, and remind a community of its better instincts. As Jordan gazed at the sun dipping below the rooftops, painting the sky in warm shades of amber and rose, he felt a profound sense of peace. The ordeal had tested him, but it had also revealed the enduring truths that would guide not only his life, but the lives of those around him. That integrity, patience, and courage could withstand even the weight of falsehood, and that home, both physical and moral, was always worth protecting.